The world had changed, and so had the people in it. What was once a peaceful, predictable existence was now a brutal struggle for survival. In a city ravaged by the undead, a small group of strangers found themselves trapped together inside a decaying shopping mall. Their past lives, their stories, their reasons for being here, were all irrelevant now. The only thing that mattered was survival. Tanya, a former office worker, was the first to spot the gathering horde outside. She had been on a quick errand when the world fell apart, and now she was clutching a half-empty water bottle and a small purse. Panic gripped her heart as she realized just how close the undead were. But her instincts kicked in. She rushed inside the mall, locking the entrance doors behind her. It wasn't long before others started to trickle in. There was Kyle, a young mechanic with a weathered face and dark circles under his eyes, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He had been scavenging for food when he'd heard the screams, then the sounds of feet shuffling across broken concrete. His hands trembled slightly as he wiped sweat from his forehead, but his resolve was firm. Next was Leah, a quiet woman who had been with her daughter when they were separated by a swarm of zombies. She hadn't spoken much since, only muttering about wanting to find her child. Her eyes were filled with worry, but beneath the fear was a steely determination to survive, even if it meant walking through fire. Lastly, there was Marcus, a tall, broad-shouldered former soldier who had seen more battles than he cared to remember. He was calm, collected, and carried himself with the sort of quiet strength that only came from years of experience. His expression was unreadable as he surveyed the group. This ragtag team of strangers had no choice but to rely on each other now. With the mall doors locked and barricaded, the group gathered inside the darkened atrium, far from the windows where the undead pressed against the glass. Tanya found herself looking at these strangers, unsure of what to say. They didn't know each other, didn't trust each other, but they had one common enemy, the zombies that had overrun the world. "We need a plan," Marcus said finally, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "The zombies outside are only the beginning. We can't stay here forever." Leah nodded, her eyes flicking nervously to the mall's only exit. "I just want to find my daughter," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kyle stepped forward, his hands still shaking. "We should think about how to escape. It's not safe here. We need supplies, weapons, food, and a way out." Tanya swallowed hard, struggling to form words. The sense of urgency in the air made her heart race. She wanted to say something comforting, something that could calm their nerves, but she knew there was no time for that. She was as scared as they were. "What's our next move?" she finally asked. "We'll have to make it past the horde," Marcus replied. "There's a fire exit at the back of the mall. If we can get there, we might have a chance." The group exchanged uneasy glances. That fire exit was their only hope of escape, but it meant leaving the safety of the mall and risking everything. And if they didn't make it, they wouldn't just be fighting for survival anymore, they'd be fighting for their lives. But fear wasn't the only thing that had brought them together. Deep down, in their hearts, each of them had a quiet, burning hope. Hope that, even in the darkest of times, courage could still turn the tide. As the group began to form a plan, an eerie silence settled over them. They could hear the distant groans of the undead outside, but for now, they were safe. However, that wouldn't last. The zombies were relentless, and as nightfall approached, the horde outside would only grow larger, hungrier, and more dangerous. Tanya, Kyle, Leah, and Marcus stood together, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. They had no choice but to trust each other, no matter how unlikely their alliance seemed. In this world, fear was a constant companion, but they knew that, united, their courage might just be the thing that would carry them through the nightmare ahead. The clock was ticking, and the mall, once a place of commerce and comfort, had become their battleground. With everything on the line, they prepared for the fight of their lives. As the light began to fade, the air inside the mall grew thicker with tension. The group moved quietly, gathering what they could from the stores, bottled water, canned food, and anything that might serve as a weapon. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice a low murmur as he surveyed the group. "We need to be smart about this. The fire exit is our only way out. We'll make it through the back corridors, quietly. Leah clutched a metal rod she'd found in a hardware store. Her grip tightened, and her face twisted in quiet agony as she thought of her daughter. The faintest of tears shimmered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no time for weakness now. Tanya had found a flashlight, its beam cutting through the growing darkness of the mall. She shone it ahead of them, her heart pounding with every step they took. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, sent her nerves on edge. The sound of the undead shuffling outside the walls seemed to grow louder as they approached the back of the building. We'll have to move quickly once we're out of here, Marcus continued. If we run into a group of them, we'll need to fight. Stay close to each other. Kyle, ever the quiet one, adjusted his jacket, looking more and more anxious with each passing minute. He glanced at Leah, who hadn't said a word since their plan was made. He knew she was torn between finding her daughter and getting out of the mall alive. Leah, he began softly, his voice hesitant. We'll find her. I promise. But we have to get out of here first. Leah met his gaze, her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't answer, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of gratitude, perhaps, or the faintest hint of hope. But that hope would be tested in the coming moments. The group made their way down the service corridor, a narrow, dimly lit space that ran parallel to the mall's main hall. Every step echoed in the silence, reminding them of just how vulnerable they were. The corridor was a maze of service doors and broken lights, and every shadow seemed to carry the threat of something lurking within it. They reached the door to the fire exit. Marcus reached for the handle, but paused. It's locked, he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. Great, Kyle muttered under his breath, glaring at the door. Just what we needed. Tanya scanned the area, her pulse racing. Is there another way out? Marcus nodded. There's a maintenance room down this hall. If we can get in, we should be able to find tools to break the lock. Without another word, the group moved swiftly, their feet barely making a sound on the tiled floor. They reached the maintenance room door, and Marcus pulled at the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was cluttered with boxes, cleaning supplies, and a small metal toolbox sitting on a workbench. Tanya grabbed the toolbox and handed it to Marcus, who immediately set to work trying to jimmy the lock open. It took a few tense minutes, but finally, the lock gave way with a soft click. The fire exit was now open. Marcus motioned for everyone to move. Stay low, stay quiet, and keep moving. No matter what happens, we stay together. The group filed out into the alleyway behind the mall, a cold breeze brushing past them. Tanya shivered, but there was no time to dwell on it. They could hear the distant groans of the undead growing louder, and their steps quickened. Just as they rounded a corner, the first of the zombies appeared, a solitary figure dragging its foot, its eyes empty and glazed over. It didn't notice them at first, but its moans echoed off the walls, drawing the attention of others. Marcus raised his hand, signaling for the group to halt. We have to deal with them, quietly. If we attract too many, we're done. Leah moved first, her makeshift weapon held tightly in her hands. Her eyes were focused, her body poised. She lunged forward, driving the rod through the zombie's skull. It crumpled to the ground in an instant, its groans silenced by the sudden impact. Nice, Kyle whispered, his voice low and calm. But don't get cocky. More zombies were now stumbling toward them, drawn by the sounds of their struggle. Marcus positioned himself in front of the group, his soldier instincts kicking in as he prepared to take down the next one. He swung a heavy wrench, knocking the next zombie to the ground with a solid blow. But there was no time to celebrate, the group had to keep moving. Go, go! Marcus urged, his voice growing urgent. We need to get to the next street before more come. They hurried forward, each one of them battling the panic rising inside. They had made it this far, but the real test was still ahead. With every turn, every step, the danger grew. And they could feel it, the unspoken truth that this unlikely group, united by fear and a common enemy, had one shot to survive. But the real question remained, could they stay united long enough to see another day? The streets outside the mall were eerily silent. The once bustling city had now turned into a graveyard, with empty cars lining the roads and buildings crumbling from years of neglect. The faint hum of the wind was the only sound that reached their ears as they moved cautiously through the alleyways. Tanya led the group, her flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she strained to listen for any signs of movement. Behind her, Marcus kept watch, his eyes darting between the shadows, alert to any danger that might be lurking. The others, Kyle and Leah, followed closely, their steps light but swift. They had made it this far, but the real challenge lay ahead. "We need to get to the old church," Marcus muttered under his breath. "It's a stronghold. We'll find shelter there." Kyle looked around nervously. "How far is it? And what if it's overrun?" "We can't stay here," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "There are too many open spaces. The church is the safest place we've got right now." Leah, her mind still consumed with thoughts of her daughter, nodded silently. The hope of finding somewhere secure was the only thing keeping her going. But as they moved deeper into the city, the sense of dread only grew. The streets seemed abandoned, yet they all knew better. The undead were never far away. As they turned a corner, the first of the walkers appeared. It was a young man, once a jogger, now a lifeless shell. His clothes were torn, his skin pale and mottled with decay. He staggered toward them, his arms outstretched in a lifeless, jerking motion. Tanya's heart skipped a beat, but Marcus was quick to react. He raised his weapon and swung it with precision, taking down the zombie before it could get too close. "That's one down," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But we need to stay sharp." Kyle nodded, glancing down the alley to make sure no others were approaching. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their own breathing. But then, without warning, a noise echoed from the far side of the street, soft at first, but unmistakable. The unmistakable shuffle of feet. Tanya's heart pounded as she quickly flicked off the flashlight, plunging them back into darkness. The others did the same, holding their breath as the sound of shuffling grew louder. The street ahead of them was now lined with shadows, and they couldn't tell where the threat was coming from. "There are more of them," Tanya whispered, her voice tight with fear. Marcus motioned for everyone to press against the building, taking cover behind a rusted dumpster. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the street. The faint glow of distant streetlights illuminated the figures stumbling toward them. A group of at least 5 zombies were heading their way, and they didn't seem to be aware of the group's presence, yet. "We stay still, we stay quiet," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If they pass by, we move. If they notice us, we fight." Tanya clenched her fists around the flashlight in her pocket, her pulse racing as the zombies came closer. They were so close now that she could almost hear their labored breathing, their groaning, and the dragging of their feet. The air grew thick with tension. Every second felt like an eternity. The first of the zombies passed just a few feet away, its eyes hollow and unseeing. The others followed, one by one, each dragging itself slowly along the street, oblivious to the living hiding just inches away. As the last zombie shuffled past, Tanya exhaled sharply, her breath shaky. She glanced at Marcus, who was still staring down the street, his gaze intense and focused. "Now," he whispered. They began to move, slowly and cautiously, keeping close to the buildings to avoid making any noise. Each step was measured, and every sound sent their hearts racing. Tanya's mind raced with every possible outcome, wondering what would happen if they made even the slightest mistake. They reached the corner of the street, but just as they were about to turn, another noise rang out, a loud crash, followed by frantic groaning. Tanya froze, her stomach dropping. The sound had come from an alley further down the block. She exchanged a glance with Marcus. "They know we're here," he said grimly. "It's time to move, fast." Without another word, they turned the corner, sprinting into the next alley. But as they ran, the unmistakable sound of pursuit reached their ears. The zombies had found them. "We're being followed," Kyle said, panic creeping into his voice. "What now?" "We head to the church, no matter what," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the growing danger. "We can't outrun them forever, but we can hold them off at the church." With every passing moment, the noise of the undead grew louder. The chase was on, and the group knew that they had only one chance to make it to safety. But even as they ran, one thing became clear: their unity, born from fear, would be the key to their survival. They just had to keep moving, and keep fighting. The wind howled through the desolate streets as the group ran, their footsteps heavy against the cracked pavement. Tanya's lungs burned, her body begging for rest, but the relentless sound of groaning and shuffling behind them drove her forward. The horde was closing in. The old church was just ahead, a looming silhouette against the darkening sky. It stood like a fortress in the middle of the abandoned city, its stained glass windows shattered, and its stone walls worn by time. But for the survivors, it was their only chance at safety. "Almost there," Marcus shouted over his shoulder, his voice tense but full of urgency. "Keep moving." They rounded the corner and sprinted toward the church's entrance, but the first of the zombies was already there, its eyes glazed and wild as it staggered toward them. Without hesitation, Marcus lunged forward, knocking the creature aside with a brutal shove. "Go," he barked. "Get inside." Tanya didn't need to be told twice. She rushed past him, her heart thudding in her chest, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the church. The others followed, one by one, slipping through the door and into the relative safety of the dark interior. The church was vast and cold, its pews long abandoned and covered in dust. Shafts of moonlight streamed through the shattered windows, casting eerie shadows on the stone floors. But despite its emptiness, it was a temporary refuge, a place to regroup, to catch their breath. But there was no time to relax. The zombies were still coming. The sound of their slow, shuffling footsteps echoed from outside, growing louder with each passing second. "We're not safe yet," Marcus said grimly as he closed the heavy doors behind them. "They'll break through if we don't fortify this place." Leah looked around the church, her eyes wild. "What do we do now? How do we stop them?" Kyle, his voice shaky but determined, spoke up. "We barricade the doors. We need to use anything we can find, chairs, pews, anything." Without waiting for a response, the group sprang into action. Tanya grabbed a broken pew and began dragging it to the door, struggling with the weight. Kyle, meanwhile, found a stack of wooden crates and shoved them up against the entrance. Leah's eyes darted around, searching for more things to block the door with. But all the while, a feeling of dread grew within her. "We can't just wait for them to break through," she said, her voice tight with fear. "What if they overwhelm us before we're ready?" Marcus stood by the door, his face hard, his hands gripping the handle as if he could feel the pressure of the undead outside. "We won't let that happen. We have weapons, we have the element of surprise. We just need to hold out long enough." They worked quickly, their makeshift barricade becoming stronger with each passing minute. As they finished, they stepped back, their eyes flicking nervously to the darkened windows. The sound of moaning outside grew louder, the unmistakable shuffle of the undead just beyond the door. The group gathered in the center of the church, weapons in hand, breathing heavily. "Stay alert," Marcus said. "We don't know how many there are. But if they get in, we fight." The first crash echoed through the church, followed by the sound of splintering wood. The barricade was holding, for now, but it wouldn't last long. The zombies were relentless, and their strength was growing. Tanya gripped the flashlight tightly, the light flickering in her trembling hands. Kyle stood near the back of the church, eyes scanning every shadow. Leah held the metal rod close to her chest, her knuckles white with the effort. But Marcus, as always, was calm, his eyes fixed on the door, his every muscle tensed and ready. And then, it happened. With a deafening crack, the barricade broke. The door flew open with a violent swing, sending debris scattering across the floor. A mass of undead creatures surged into the church, their eyes hollow and their mouths agape, hungry for flesh. "Fight!" Marcus shouted. The group sprang into action, each of them facing their worst nightmare. Tanya swung her flashlight like a club, striking the nearest zombie across the skull. It crumpled to the ground, its body twitching as it fell. But more were pouring through the door, dozens of them, their groans filling the air. Kyle swung a crate at one of the zombies, knocking it backward, but it quickly got back to its feet, unrelenting. Leah's rod connected with another zombie's skull with a sickening crack, but more kept coming. Tanya's heart raced, her mind whirling. They were surrounded. The church's vast interior seemed like it was shrinking with every passing second. They were outnumbered, and the air was thick with fear. But amid the chaos, something else began to surface, an unspoken strength that kept them fighting. Together. The group fought side by side, never breaking formation. Tanya's swings became more practiced, more deadly. Kyle's hands steadied, and he found a rhythm in his movements. Leah, once uncertain, now fought with a quiet ferocity, her face grim but resolute. And Marcus? He was everywhere, leading the charge, taking down zombies with cold efficiency. But they weren't out of danger yet. The door was wide open, and they could hear the endless moans of more zombies gathering outside. If they didn't take control of the situation soon, they'd be overwhelmed. "We need to move," Marcus shouted, his voice rising over the noise. Now. The church was a battleground. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the chaos of battle. Tanya's arm ached from the constant swinging of her flashlight, which had become her only weapon in this madness. Each time she struck a zombie, another seemed to take its place, relentless, hungry, and unfeeling. She could hear the others shouting, the clang of metal against bone, but it all felt muffled, as though the world was spinning too fast for her to catch up. "Move! Move!" Marcus's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. Tanya's heart raced as she saw him shove his way through the group, leading them toward the back of the church. It wasn't just the zombies they had to worry about now, it was the growing sense of hopelessness, the creeping fear that they might not make it out of here alive. "We need to take control of the back," Marcus shouted again, his eyes darting toward the rear of the church, where the stained glass windows were shattered, casting jagged shadows on the floor. "We can't just keep fighting them here." Tanya glanced back at the front doors. The zombies were swarming in, flooding the entryway like an unstoppable tide. With every step, the pressure built. They couldn't keep pushing them back forever. "Where are we going?" Leah's voice trembled. She was breathing heavily, her face pale and streaked with sweat. "We're trapped." "We can't stay here," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "We've got to get to the bell tower. If we can get up there, we'll have a vantage point, a chance to fight them off from above." Tanya nodded, barely hearing him through the panic clawing at her chest. The bell tower was high, too high for the zombies to reach. If they could just get there, they'd be safe. But that was a big if. Marcus led the way, forcing his way through the group and shoving aside a zombie that had staggered too close. Tanya followed, her mind racing. She could feel her legs burning, her chest tight, but she pushed through, her eyes fixed on the spiral staircase ahead of her. But the moment they reached the foot of the stairs, something happened that made her stomach drop. The sound of footsteps, no, running feet, echoed from the back of the church. Someone was coming down from the bell tower. "Get back!" Marcus shouted, his voice suddenly sharp. "It's a trap." Before anyone could react, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the broken windows. It was a man, ragged, disheveled, and covered in dirt and blood. But what stood out most were the wild, unblinking eyes. His hands were raised in surrender, but the gun in his grasp told a different story. "Stay where you are," he barked, his voice shaky but urgent. "I've got a gun. Don't come any closer." The group froze. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest as she took a cautious step back, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. Who was this man? What did he want? Was he another survivor, or had he been turned? Marcus's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice low and steady. "We just need to get to the bell tower. We're running out of time." The man's eyes flicked to the zombies pressing in on them from the main door, then back to the group. His gun wavered slightly in his hands, and Tanya could see the desperation in his face. "I don't know who you are," he said, his voice cracking. "But if you want to live, you need to leave. They're everywhere." The sound of zombies groaning and clawing at the church doors was growing louder, and Tanya could feel the tension in the room rise. They couldn't waste time negotiating with a stranger. But at the same time, they couldn't just leave him behind. If he was truly alive, he was a part of their fight now. Marcus took a step forward, his gaze unrelenting. "We'll help you. But you need to move. The bell tower is our only chance." The man hesitated, his hand trembling as he lowered the gun slightly. His eyes flicked over the group once more, then settled on Marcus. After a long moment, he sighed deeply, as though making a decision. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow. "But you're not the only ones looking for safety." Without another word, he turned and began to climb the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The group followed closely behind, their footsteps light but urgent. As they ascended, Tanya's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How had he survived this long? And why had he come down from the bell tower just as they were trying to reach it? The answer, however, was one they didn't have time to figure out. Behind them, the sound of shuffling feet grew louder, the unmistakable groans of the undead growing ever closer. There was no time for hesitation. There was no time to stop. They had to reach the bell tower. They had to survive. And if the man was their only chance to make it out alive, they had no choice but to trust him, for now. But deep down, Tanya couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The bell tower loomed higher as they climbed the narrow, winding staircase, each step creaking underfoot, each breath growing heavier. Tanya's mind raced with the urgency of their situation. Zombies were close. Too close. Yet she couldn't help but wonder about the man in front of her, this stranger with the gun, his hurried steps, and the flickering uncertainty in his eyes. They were trusting him, but did they really have a choice? The air grew colder the higher they went, and the distant moans from below felt like they were closing in on them. Tanya's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the old stone walls. Her heartbeat matched the thudding of her boots on the ancient wood of the stairs, each step a countdown to the uncertain future awaiting them above. The man ahead of them, the one who had led them up the stairs, didn't speak again after his agreement to join them. His face was set in grim lines, his eyes darting warily from side to side. He seemed to be trying to block out the sounds of the zombies closing in below, but he wasn't fooling anyone. "How long do you think we've got?" Kyle asked, his voice low but filled with anxiety. "I'm not sure we can hold them off if they come charging up these stairs." The man in front of them paused, his hand gripping the railing tighter as he looked down at the group, his face hardening. "They won't stop coming. Not unless we make them. But once they've got the scent, it's like they're relentless. So, I don't know how long we've got. But I do know one thing." Everyone stopped, their eyes on him. Tanya's pulse quickened, uncertain whether she wanted to hear what came next. "I've been up there for weeks," he continued, his voice grim. "And I haven't heard a single other survivor since I came down here. If you want to live, you'll need more than just numbers. You'll need strategy." Marcus exchanged a look with Tanya, his jaw tightening. "What kind of strategy are you talking about?" The man gave a short, bitter laugh as he climbed the last step into the bell tower. "Let's just get up there first. Then I'll tell you." The top of the tower greeted them with a cold gust of wind, blowing through the broken windows like a haunted whisper. The tower was wide, with ancient stone walls and a massive, rusted bell hanging overhead, its rope frayed and worn. The floorboards beneath their feet creaked with every movement, as though protesting their presence. Outside, the city spread out below them, dark and empty except for the distant silhouette of zombies milling around in the streets. Tanya stepped cautiously to the edge, peering out at the distant horizon. Her heart sank as she saw the sheer number of undead below, hundreds, maybe more, all aimlessly wandering, groaning, shuffling through the streets like a never-ending tide. It was a sight she would never forget. The city had become their graveyard. "We can't fight them all off," Tanya said, her voice tight with fear. What's your plan? The man turned and faced them now, his eyes hard with resolve. First, we hold this position. There's a small supply of food and water in the storage rooms here. It'll last us a while. We'll need to wait them out. But what if they don't leave? Leah asked, her voice trembling. What if they just keep coming until we're all dead? I'm betting they won't, the man said quietly. Once they've exhausted the area, they'll wander off. Zombies aren't as focused as they seem. They follow sound. They follow scent. But they'll lose interest in this place eventually. Tanya wasn't sure she believed him, but she couldn't deny the desperation in his voice. He sounded like someone who had been here far too long, someone who had seen things break down in ways that defied logic. Marcus frowned. And what about after they leave? Do you expect us to just walk away, like nothing happened? The man's eyes flicked to the door of the bell tower. I don't know what's waiting for us out there. But it's better than staying down there. And it's better than waiting for them to break through. The conversation hung in the air, suspended between hope and despair. Everyone was looking for an answer. Everyone was looking for something that could get them through the next hour, the next day, the next step. Tanya's thoughts raced. The man's plan sounded too uncertain to put all their faith in, but it was the best option they had. There was no way to fight off the horde. No way to run. The bell tower, high above the rest of the city, seemed like the only sanctuary. Then we hold this place, Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. We do it together. We stick to the plan and make sure no one gets left behind. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. You're smarter than you look. Leah gave him a wary look but didn't say anything, her eyes still focused on the looming shadows below. Tanya glanced around the bell tower, her thoughts swirling. The fear in the pit of her stomach hadn't subsided, but there was something else now, an uneasy hope. They might survive this. They might even have a chance if they worked together. But only time would tell. The bell tower was eerily quiet now, the steady hum of distant groans and the shuffle of footsteps from below muffling everything else. The wind howled through the broken windows, but inside, a strange stillness settled over the group. No one spoke much, each person lost in their own thoughts as they began to settle into what would be their new temporary refuge. There was no turning back now. Tanya stood by the window, her eyes scanning the darkened city. The horizon was an unbroken line of ruin, the streets littered with abandoned vehicles and abandoned lives. In the distance, the unmistakable shape of the horde moved like a wave across the landscape, an undulating mass of bodies that had been pushed into the city by hunger, desperation, and instinct. They were close, but not close enough to be an immediate threat. For now, they were safe. But that wasn't a feeling she was used to. Not in this world. The safety was temporary, an illusion. The zombies below were relentless. Sooner or later, they would find them, and the illusion of safety would shatter. This is too quiet, Kyle muttered, pacing the small space of the bell tower. His face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously to the door, as though waiting for something to burst through at any moment. Leah sat on the floor near the wall, her back against the cold stone, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She looked worn, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were glazed, her mind clearly distant. Tanya couldn't blame her. The constant threat of death had worn them all down. The weight of the apocalypse wasn't just in the constant danger, it was in the silence, the waiting, the knowing that at any moment, everything could fall apart. The man who had led them here, Troy, he had introduced himself as, had finally collapsed into one of the old pews, his eyes closed. The gun he had carried lay on the ground beside him. He had stopped talking once they reached the tower, leaving the group to their own devices, as if he had already resigned himself to the fact that survival here was only temporary. Tanya turned away from the window and made her way to the others. She needed to speak to them, to reassure them that they hadn't come this far only to give up now. "What's the plan?" she asked softly, sitting beside Marcus, who was hunched over, his hands running through his hair. He exhaled slowly, looking around at the group. "We wait for now. It's the only choice we have." "Wait?" Leah's voice was a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. What happens when they come up here? What then? Marcus's gaze hardened, his brow furrowing. We make our stand. If it comes to that. The idea of fighting the horde was a sobering one. The bell tower was sturdy enough, but it wasn't impenetrable. The zombies, when they got desperate enough, would find a way and nothing ever truly stopped them. Tanya didn't want to dwell on it, but she couldn't help it. The dread gnawed at her insides. You think they'll just stop looking for us? She asked. We'll have food for a while, sure, but what about after that? What happens when we run out of supplies? The room fell silent. It was the question they all had been avoiding, the one that loomed over them like a storm cloud, dark and inevitable. Supplies would run out. That much was certain. I don't know, Marcus said quietly. But we'll figure something out. We have to. Troy, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in a while. You'll have to. There's no future in staying up here forever. Tanya turned toward him, studying his weathered face. He looked older than his years, as if the world had aged him beyond recognition. He didn't make eye contact, instead staring at the gun on the floor. What do you mean by that? She asked, her voice cautious. Troy shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes still downcast. You're going to have to leave eventually. There's no food here. No real shelter. You'll be stuck, running in circles if you don't start planning ahead. Leah shivered, rubbing her arms as if to ward off the cold. I can't think about that right now. We just got here. I know, Troy replied, his voice low. But you will. It's not just about surviving the night. It's about surviving the next one. The conversation hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Tanya felt the weight of it pressing down on her. Everyone was looking for something to hold on to, but in the end, survival didn't care about hopes or plans, it was just about staying alive long enough to see the next day. How do you know all this? Marcus asked suddenly, his voice sharper than before. How do you know what's coming? Troy finally met his gaze, and there was a hard edge to his eyes. Because I've been here before. I've seen this play out. And it doesn't end the way you want it to. There was an uncomfortable pause before Kyle broke it. So what? You're telling us there's no hope? Troy didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up the gun beside him, running his fingers over the cold metal. I'm saying the world's different now. And if you don't start seeing it that way, you won't last. The room went silent again. The weight of his words sank in, settling over them like a shadow. Tanya stared out the window once more, watching the distant shapes of the zombies still moving through the streets. She could feel the cold creeping into her bones, but it wasn't just the wind, it was the truth of what Troy had said. There was no going back. They were in this for the long haul. And somehow, they had to make it work. The night stretched on like an endless void, each hour blending into the next in a haze of uncertainty and exhaustion. Tanya sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon above and the dim flashlights flickering from the survivors within the bell tower. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone, but it was the silence, the oppressive silence, that gnawed at her nerves. The zombies were still there, roaming the city below, but they hadn't made a move. Not yet. Tanya's thoughts kept returning to Troy's warning. The world had changed, and it was only a matter of time before the tower's refuge would no longer be enough. It didn't matter how many supplies they had, they were sitting ducks, waiting for something they couldn't control. Troy had been right about one thing, survival wasn't just about lasting until the next day. It was about adapting to the new rules of this world. We need a plan, she said, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. Her voice was quiet but firm, like a quiet plea for them to wake up from the nightmare they had all been trying to ignore. Marcus, who had been pacing near the back of the room, turned to her. His face was drawn, tired, but his eyes were sharp, determined. We've been trying to figure that out, but it's hard to make a plan when we don't know what's coming. Troy, who had been silent for most of the evening, looked up from his seat by the door. His eyes were tired, too, but there was a hard resolve in them that hadn't been there before. "You're right. We've run out of time." The weight of those words settled over them, and for a moment, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Tanya stood up, her fingers curling into fists. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come. We need to make a move, before it's too late." Kyle, who had been fidgeting nervously at the far end of the tower, spoke up. "Where do we even go? The city is swarming with them. We'll be walking straight into a death trap if we go down there." "It's not about where we go," Troy said, standing up now. His voice was steady, unshaken. "It's about what we do next. We have to make them think we're not here. We have to outsmart them." Leah, who had been mostly silent throughout the discussion, raised an eyebrow. "Outsmart them? You've got a better idea?" Troy nodded slowly. "I've been watching the Horde. They don't follow a clear path. They're aimless, drawn to noise, to movement. If we create a distraction, a big one, they'll focus on that. It'll give us a window of time to slip out of here." It was a risky plan, and everyone knew it. But what choice did they have? The longer they stayed holed up in the tower, the more likely they were to be discovered. The Horde was unpredictable, but they were also persistent. It wasn't a matter of if they would find them, but when. "Do you have a plan for the distraction?" Marcus asked, eyeing Troy carefully. Troy paused, looking out over the desolate city below. "I do. But it won't be easy. It'll require all of us to work together. One wrong move, and it's over." "We don't have a choice," Tanya said firmly, her eyes meeting each of theirs. "If we stay here, we die. If we go, we might survive. We have to do this." After a long, tense silence, the others nodded, the decision made. Troy moved toward the back of the bell tower, where an old wooden door led to the bell mechanism. It hadn't been used in years, but it still worked, just barely. He began fiddling with the ancient machinery, adjusting gears and pulling levers, setting up the mechanism that would set the bell ringing. The others gathered around, preparing what little they could. Leah and Kyle searched the storage rooms for any remaining supplies, while Marcus kept an eye on the window, watching for any signs that the zombies were moving closer. Minutes later, Troy stepped back, his hands covered in grime and sweat. "It's ready," he said. "When we pull this rope, the bell will ring loud enough to draw them in. But it won't last long. We've got one chance." Everyone gathered in front of the door, their hearts pounding in their chests. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were about to take the first step into the unknown, hoping against hope that this would work. "On my count," Troy said. "We do this together. No one gets left behind." Tanya looked at each person in turn, her gaze lingering on Marcus, on Leah, on Kyle. They were strangers, brought together by fear. But now, they were more than that. They were a team. And together, they would face whatever came next. 1, 2, 3. With a final pull, the bell rang out, its deafening sound echoing across the city. The zombies below immediately began to move in response to the noise, shuffling and groaning toward the sound. "This is it," Tanya whispered, her heart racing. "Let's go." And with that, the group moved as one, racing toward the exit of the bell tower, hoping the distraction would give them enough time to escape the Horde. They didn't know what awaited them outside, but they knew one thing for certain: this was their fight. And they would give everything they had to survive. The final stand had begun.